Hello and Happy New Year to everybody who's joined us so far today, and welcome to our first regional webinar of 2021 and the second that we've done with the London and South East region. For those of you who haven't attended one of the webinars, I'll soon be passing you over to Helen to begin, but a quick agenda for today. We've got kind of our introduction, and then we'll have our two speakers and presentations from Sam and Jeff, followed by a Q&A session. So any questions that you think of during the session, please send them into your question box on the right hand side there, and we'll address as many as we can after the presentations are done. Any that we don't get to, normally we get to all of them, but any we don't get to, I'll save down and pass it over to the panelists to answer in their own time, and I'll include that with a recording of the webinar, which normally goes out the evening of or kind of in the days following the webinar, so you can either pass it on to colleagues or friends, or you can kind of watch it again. So that's everything from me, my kind of brief introduction done. So I'll pass you over to Helen now. If you've got any questions, put it in the question box or the chat box as well if you're having any issues. So I'll now pass you over to Helen, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Morning everyone, welcome to BOHS's London and South East virtual webinar on asbestos. As always, this is a London and South East webinar, but as we've now gone virtual and everything, it's open to everybody. As it went so well last time, we thought we'd have another go at the webinar. So here we are. London normally have an asbestos webinar, well, asbestos meeting every year in the summer, but obviously we've not been able to do that in the current pandemic. So we are arranged for now. As always, if you have any ideas for speakers or other presentations for any region, not just us, get in touch with your regional organizer. The details are on the BOHS website, or you can use the communities tab off the website as well and just type in your thoughts, and the regional organizer will pick that one up. As London and South East, we haven't actually got any more webinars in the pipeline at the moment, but you may find that there are other ones from other regions. So keep your eyes open on the website and your emails for other webinars in the pipeline. For this one, we'll have the two speakers. We've got Jeff and we've got Sam. And right at the end of the presentations, we'll do the questions. So if you type your questions in the question box, and we'll get to them right at the end. If you have any specific questions for either speaker during their presentation, then just type them into the chat box and direct them at the presenter, and hopefully they'll be able to pick them up then. I'm going to pass you to Neil now. Neil is the fibres lead for BOHS, and he is going to introduce our two speakers for today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. First time I've done this, so we're starting with the HSE asbestos update, and that's going to be given by Sam Lord. Sam is a chartered occupational hygienist and principal specialist inspector at the Health and Safety Executive. A career in asbestos began by working as an asbestos analyst and surveyor at a UCAS accredited laboratory. And Sam is currently HSE's occupational hygiene portfolio holder for asbestos, metalworking fluids, waste and recycling, and non-food production asthmagens, if I pronounce that correctly, where she provides technical expertise to HSE investigations, proactive inspection, and research programs and civil contingency events. Sam engages with external stakeholders through membership of the Asbestos Network and the Federation of Decontamination Equipment Providers. And she is a member of FAM and a current board member of FAM as well. And over to you, Sam.
Great, thanks, Neil. Morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me and everyone's joining. I can see the numbers are increasing as we go. So today, I've got 30 minutes or so, and I thought I'd just give an update on a number of things. Hang on. Oh, I don't seem to be able to. Oh, yeah, there we go. I'll have to do it that way. Sorry about that. Give you an update on some new HSE guidance which has been published I've gone back through to last year, but also this year the Analyst guide will finally be published. I haven't got an actual date, but most of my presentation is going to be looking at that. Apologies to any of you who attended the FAM conference, because much of the content has been drawn from that, but hopefully there'll be interesting stuff for those of you that didn't and are not a member of FAM. So those are things I'm going to talk about. A brief, literally, update on some HSE research in asbestos, which our science division colleagues are embarking on. And finally, again, some sort of relevant information at this time about EU exit. I thought that might be useful. And also something called a Flex 860/70 standard, which looks at competence in the built environment. So I just thought those would be quite relevant to everyone. Hopefully there's something for everyone that's listening. So yeah, let's carry on. So first of all, I'm going to give you a sort of a walkthrough, I guess. It's the final draft, so it is still subject to change, although I do know that the final changes read through have been done, so I've updated this presentation to include those. But I thought it'd just be useful. It's a thick document. It's probably one of the biggest documents HSE will actually publish. I think it's about 270 pages. And clearly it's not something you'd read from page 1 to page 270. So I thought it might be useful just when it does land in your inboxes or on your desk, how you would go about looking at it. And depending on whether you're a technical person or I'm presuming the majority of you out there at the minute are sort of generalists, so you might just want to look at it in terms of getting an up-to-date view of asbestos, and particularly the aspects relating to asbestos monitoring, bulk sampling. So hopefully this will help you do that. Okay, so the actual structure of the guide, it's very different to the old one. It's split into 4 parts. I've detailed those on the slide. The first 3 parts basically take about, I think it's 70 pages, 70 or 80 pages, so a third of the total document. So you could probably read them in about a couple of hours. But that really sort of covers the non-technical side. So it's very much an overview of what is then put in a lot of technical detail in part 4, where you've got technical appendices. And within the parts 1 to 3, they're all subdivided into chapters. And then part 4, there's 9 technical appendices. So the next sort of slides, I'm going to go through the various chapters within those parts. And then at the end, I'm just going to have a slide of all the technical appendices. So those of you that may be analysts or work in labs as well as doing other hygiene work, you probably would just want to cherry pick the relevant chapter and then look at the technical appendix for the detail in there. Okay, so part 1 basically looks at roles and arrangements. And chapter 1 sort of covers a general look at the analyst's role and responsibilities. I should say the word analyst also sort of encompasses surveyors as well, so anyone that does bulk sampling. So it sort of supplements and aligns in with the survey guide. So what I'm going to do really is highlight some of the key points, but most importantly really the key changes. So hopefully this will cover some of those. And I suppose I should also say that this guidance has been written over quite a long period, quite a few years, and it has actually been very much informed by new research or studies which has looked at what goes on out there and how analysts perform. So it's very much been informed by those things. So some of these points will be drawn out through the new added bits or the key changes to the guidance. So the first thing is that analysts, just reminding people that analysts should not perform site clearances where there's shared links between the analyst and contractors. I think this has been something which has been always sort of an issue that's out there, but this is now written into the guidance. It's not legislation, but it is in the guidance. So people have asked what the shared links are. So I've given some examples there. These are taken direct from HSE 248, so common ownership, common management, contractual arrangements. So it's important to have this independence and impartiality. But obviously, sometimes that's unavoidable, the way the industry is changing and companies are sort of collating together. But if that is unavoidable, there must be written agreement with the building client. And there's a lot of information in this section about written policies and procedures and how to monitor those to basically demonstrate that independence and impartiality. Okay, so that's a new element. Going on to chapter 2, this is all about accreditation and quality assurance. And it's really, again, drawing attention to the fact that analysts and their employer do have these legal responsibilities under the Health and Safety at Work Act, that their actions don't affect the health and safety of other colleagues and others. So it's really, I guess, really trying to highlight that the work of an analyst is very, very important, and there's a lot of a lot of weight on their shoulders. They're not just people you just shove in to go and do an air test, and it's really trying to make them realise or remind them really that there's not only the legal responsibility, but there's obviously the moral responsibility there as well. And one way of doing this, obviously, is to part of the organisation policy and procedures is to have this continual assessment of analyst work, which will be required as part of the UCAS requirements. But there's information about what that could actually look like. So I've detailed some there, and this is where we go into sort of programming of auditing and monitoring and inspection. And there's a table. There's quite a lot of tables within the guidance, and one of the tables basically sets out an auditing protocol for looking at 4-stage clearances. So again, hopefully this will be really useful to allow analyst organisations to put in place these procedures, or improve their existing procedures, I should say. Okay, chapter 3. This basically looks at competence and qualifications. There's an appendix 9, which has basically got some tables which look at various aspects of analyst proficiencies, I think they call it. So bulk sampling, fibre identification, identification and quantification in soils. So in that appendix, there's tables which basically have got an awful lot of detail as to what the elements of what the core competencies would look like. So again, that would be really useful, I think, to people to either use to develop their own sort of training programs and checklists. So that's something which is new into the guidance. And then this chapter 3 sort of gives you an overview and covers some basic information about the core competencies for analysts. Okay, so part 2 is about the sampling analysis and clearance work. So chapter 4 basically looks at bulk sampling and material analysis. Again, there's quite a lot of tables in there which consider sampling strategies and methods. These sort of build on, those of you that are surveyors will know the ones in HSE 264, but these sort of build on and are in addition to those that are contained in that document. But they run through things like asbestos products, but also things like asbestos debris, dust samples, rocks and stone products, which is a new thing, and also soils and made ground. Chapter 5, that's basically about measurement of airborne fibre concentrations. So really the sort of the monitoring, air monitoring side of things. And this is really, I mentioned earlier about how research has informed amendments and changes to the analyst guide. And those of you that are analysts or have been sort of aware of some of the major issues that we've identified, one of the things is, and I guess really it applies to all occupational hygiene monitoring, this real lack of information or contextual information that goes alongside that result, that monitoring airborne concentration. So with analysts has been a problem. We haven't, people have just done the monitoring, filled out the form, and what does that mean? And it's very important really to sort of relate that number to the contextual information about the site. So, what were they doing? Were they removing? What sort of asbestos were they removing? The conditions, was it confined space? How long was the work? Did anything go wrong? So all those sorts of things, including a lot of obviously the control measures that were in place, that really does need to be sought and recorded on the form. And the other thing which we're trying to sort of improve through the new guidance is sort of identifying appropriate sampling strategies for when you're doing monitoring, particularly during license removal work. So if you're doing license removal work, those workers have to have health records, and they have to have their monitoring and also assessed against the control limit. But often one of the problems is that the monitoring will only be an hour, even when the work can take a whole shift. But that monitoring period is just then reported, and they don't even report the time weighted average. So again, appreciate that it is confusing, and there's lots of different types of monitoring you can do, but there's a table which I'll show you in a couple of slides time, which is designed really to sort of help explain this a little bit clearer. And I'm also involved in some work currently with through the Asbestos network and the technical working groups, trying to explain that to the licensed contractors as well as the analysts which are doing the monitoring. And obviously, if we're sort of saying you only need to do, people are just going on site quickly. I know a lot of analysts just often cover a couple of sites in one day, but if they really need to be there to get all that contextual information, it's important that is understood. And obviously that means clients and analysts will need to make sure that they're booked on for that site visit for sufficient time. So within this chapter, there's also information about use and limitations of phase contrast microscopy, so looking down the microscope to count the fibres. And there's a bit more detail on this and suggested strategies to overcome those limitations. And then finally, this again is a new thing, it's really directed at analyst organisations to actually monitor or carry out periodic personal sampling on their own analysts, just to make sure that their own work practices, particularly when they're going inside the asbestos enclosure to do a visual inspection and the air testing, to make sure that their controls are adequate. So to support the information, the pointer made about the improved contextual information, there's now a template in Appendix 6, which basically Appendix 6 contains all templates, including the revised ones for 4-stage clearance. But there's a template here for personal sampling, and I appreciate you might not be able to see it, but there is now information that sort of boxes that say type of work carried out, type of asbestos product, asbestos removal method, controls used, and other factors. So hopefully this will help sort of stimulate this recording of contextual information. And this was what I was saying about in terms of some tables which are helping to sort of explain the different types of sampling. So this particular one here is looking at static sampling, and you can see there's the various different types, but particularly there's some new aspects in there. So there's something called near source static sampling, which is can be used inside enclosures, or particularly, I suppose, work without an enclosure, so if it's not possible to build one. And then something called far source or perimeter sampling. So that's really more relevant to work on contaminated land, soil remediation work, where you'd put pumps around the site, or even like a landfill site, for example, an asbestos landfill site. So that's again new stuff, which just want to draw your attention to. In table 5.2, this is going back to personal monitoring, or personal monitoring and static sampling, I should say, but this contains the detail about sampling rates. There was a table in the old HSE 248 which looked very similar to this, but the key things that have changed, I've highlighted in red there with a red circle. The sampling rate for doing compliance testing against the 4-hour control limit, that previously was just put at 1, but it now can go between 1 and 2. But it is very important that the minimum volume of 240 litres is sampled. And that really means sampling for at least 2 hours, either continuously or as 2 separate samples. So again, if you can't, and again, it's really about thinking about the type of work that's going on. So a lot of this personal monitoring is for the licensed contractor. So if they're doing a long job that's looking at removing AIB, it would make sense to, let's do some control limit compliance monitoring on that long job, because then at least we can get the pumps on for over at least 2 hours to get some representative sampling results. Really, this is what this is all about. But there's also an acknowledgement here, and this is a new one, a new application, specific short duration activities. So appreciate not every asbestos removal job is sort of goes on for hours and hours or days and days. So if there's something a bit unusual, or you wanted to maybe look at something like taking waste out of an enclosure, it's perfectly acceptable to do specific short duration activities. So that's again, it's trying to sort of I guess illustrate the benefits of monitoring, but that they're not just, like I keep saying, it's not just a number. It's about using monitoring to actually inform risk assessments or inform people about what's going on, what their workers are doing. Okay, so chapter 6 is about site clearance and certification. There's a new handover form now, which is not part of the, well, it's not part of the 4-stage clearance form, but it's a separate standalone form that basically has to be completed by the licensed contractor to say that they have visually inspected everything and they're happy for the 4-stage clearance procedure to start. Okay, so that's something that's new. And again, one of the analyst project that was conducted, looking at on-site analysts, a lot of analysts were found to be clearing up dust and debris themselves. And clearly this isn't acceptable. They're actually doing license removal work by doing so. So again, it's a reminder that they should not be doing this, but they clearly can instruct the removal contractor during the visual inspection if they were to come across any debris. Okay, so still looking at site clearance and certification. Again, we're trying to, the new form has now got additional sections in to basically tie up or deal with some of the aspects that meant that the visual inspections weren't as good as they could be. So a lot of this is to do with the time that's required, and that needs to be pre-estimated, and there's tools and tables to help analysts do that, and that needs to be done before the work, the clearance actually starts. So again, it can be built into the project, and the analyst can be on site for the amount of time that may take, and that could actually be many hours if it's a huge removal job or a huge area. So that needs to be recorded and planned into the work itself. The other big change is obviously with the development of ability to take photographs and the very much the use of photographic evidence to demonstrate quality and the fact that things have actually taken place. There's a lot of photographs that need to be taken to basically demonstrate that the sampling pumps have been put in areas, but particularly if a clearance was to be failed, photographs of the reasons why. And I think that will very much support the analyst when they have their conversation with the removal contractor. So that's an important thing. Video evidence can also be used, but it doesn't have to. But that's and there's in table 6.1, there's details where what photos and where you should take them. So that should be helpful. And again, the templates have been updated to reflect that. I've talked about the factors to consider when estimating inspection time again, so there's some useful information about that and examples of inspection times as well. Okay, so this is a new chapter all about soils and made ground. It basically summarises the requirements, and this is important really. It's about the requirements for those that are actually working in areas where have been contaminated with asbestos soil and made ground. So construction workers, those undertaking remediation work prior to construction work. So it's all about informing, doing sampling and analysis to inform the risk assessment that they need to do under the control of asbestos regs. Okay, there are those of you that perhaps are aware of contaminated land and other legislation. There obviously is a load of other requirements to comply with the environmental requirements under Part 2A, and the idea is not to create any friction, but to hopefully align these two. But it does take hopefully the guidance will sort of clearly explain how that will happen. Appendix 7, that's all about surveying and sampling strategies for soils and made ground. So there's a lot of information in there. And also interpretation of results for site workers. Again, it's all about sort of, particularly with soils, you know, and there's been quite a lot of work about different, how you assess a soil, how you get fibres from it depending on how wet it is, whether it's granulated. And so there's some useful information and advice which can be provided there. And this is sort of related, but it's not just to do with soil remediation, contaminated land sites, but Appendix 8, again, is a new chapter. This is all about on-site sampling. So it's really about not necessarily, it's not sort of when you're doing removal work inside an enclosure necessarily. This is more to do with sampling when there's perhaps been an incident or like an explosion or something, or yes, doing remediation work, soil remediation work for contaminated land. And this really talks about static sampling and this notion of actually doing static sampling for longer periods. So potentially 6, 7, 8 hours, which is very sort of different from what the monitoring for 4-stage clearance work involves. And this is really to get able to measure concentrations right down to a lower level. So we've got another sort of decimal place, if you like, compared to what we're used to looking for the clearance level indicator. And it also talks about the use of electron microscopy to identify whether those fibres are actually asbestos and achieve the lower limit of quantification if required. Okay, so part 3 is about controlling the risks to analysts. Very briefly, there's a really good table here. I think this is really good in chapter 8. This is all about personal protective equipment, and it basically sets out the different scenarios that an analyst or a surveyor could find themselves in. So we've got survey or other sampling and what PPE they need to wear, including domestic clothing underneath. So that's obviously when they go into when they're not doing a clearance procedure in a license removal work. So that's helpful. It's got coveralls, RPE, cleanable footwear, and also information about decontamination. So are they able just to use a preliminary decontamination, or do they need the full decontamination procedure inside the DCU, the decontamination unit? So that I think is really helpful. And then if they do need to go into the decontamination unit, there's some nice pictures here to sort of help illustrate the procedure, because it can get, if you don't do it lots of times, it can get a bit confusing as to what you need to wear when and what you take off when. So hopefully that will be helpful, because that visually explains it. And then finally, part 4. So yeah, this is the bulk of the document. And there's 9 appendices, they're all listed there. I've referred to quite a few during the slides beforehand, but that is, like I said, the bulk of the information, where the technical, the maths and the equations lie. They're not all like that, I must say, but certainly the elements that involve technical looking at, and they're quite sort of hefty chapters, so chapters 4 and 5. But yeah, that hopefully gives you a good overview of HSG 248. Hopefully it will be coming out soon, but I can't say when, but it's very, very close. Okay, so I'm just going to now briefly just cover, like I said, some other guidance which has been published by HSE last year, which touches on asbestos or may be relevant. So HSG 33, this is all about health and safety in roof work. This is the 5th edition, but it does have an appendix, Appendix 5, that looks at demolition involving asbestos cement roof sheets. So this appendix has always been there, but there's a few additions in this version. This came out in August 2020. So it's got a bit more information about the methods when you remove sheets by hand. It also mentions perimeter air monitoring. This is exactly like I was saying earlier about some of the perimeter air monitoring. That's another scenario, removing asbestos cement roofs where you could use it. And also some clarification on PPE and RPE use. So it now says that it should be worn by all workers physically involved in removing and cleaning up activities. That's sort of made clearer in this version. And that RPE will not be necessary for enclosed vehicle cab operators, but where that cab air is filtered and windows and doors are kept closed. So there's a caveat there. Okay. This piece of guidance here, this came out in February 2020, so it's almost been out a year. And this really came about as a result of some analysis of some marble which had fractured, and the investigation as to why it fractured found the presence of some asbestos in it potentially. So this sort of triggered this guidance basically, and I suppose the thing to the main point to put over, and this is what's stated in there, is that the risk from asbestos fibres within stone is considered negligible, but when they're present at trace levels, which is 1 or 2 fibres, as defined in HSG 248, that hasn't changed within. That's written in the regulation, but it hasn't changed in HSG 248. So there's a bit of guidance on actions you might need to take, and there's an appendix. Again, this is very much really aimed at those who do analysis. So, but there is a stepped analytical approach. So there's different types of analysis that you would go through, almost like in a staged way, to determine whether asbestos is present. And it's important to sort of, I think that was felt important to sort of not standardise. Well, I suppose it is standardisation of the analysis, because different analysis approaches can come up with different results. And then finally in Appendix 2, there's a case study which prompted, like I said at the start, which prompted this guidance. Okay, so this is nothing to do with asbestos or occupational hygiene per se, but it came out in October 2020. I must confess I haven't downloaded it. I think we're meant to be getting it free as HSE inspectors, but it's basically an app designed really for small businesses. And I guess it sort of contains this is just the sort of the standard information that talks about what it does. So it's got guidance on how to manage workplace risks. There's the SME friendly stress risk assessment app on there too, or not an app, but a section on there, and the health and safety toolbox, intuitive search function, and access to the online store, and live updates. So I suppose what it's aiming to do is, rather than go on our website and try and find this information, by putting it all in an app, it's sort of more there, easier to find, and particularly for SMEs, like I said. This next one is really just about, just to sort of make you aware. You may already been aware because this research has been going on for a few years. So this is basically our science division, formerly the Health and Safety Laboratory up in Buxton. So some of you may know Dan Barrowcliffe or Laurie Davis. So they're in the fibres team up there. So they're currently embarking or writing up some work really on asbestos exposures during licence removal work. This is still, I think they've done most of the, I'm sure he said they've done most of the sort of surveying work, and they're writing this up now. So I'm sure once all this has been written up and it will be published, I'm sure Dan will come and be very happy to speak, maybe at a future asbestos event, but certainly at the FAM conference to explain this research, just to make you aware that that's coming and hopefully be reporting in the next year or so. And finally, I asked policy colleagues for an update on EU exit, and there's a web link there, those of you that want to maybe have a look at some of the changes that may impact things like, there are some changes obviously to do with product safety, biocides, and if you go onto that link there, that will provide information to do with that. But in terms of occupational hygiene, it's really just to set out that whilst we've left the EU, asbestos and occupational lung disease is still very much part of the strategy, and the regulatory frameworks that are in place both for COSH and other occupational health risks, including asbestos, they still remain. The intention is still to have the domestic workplace exposure limit setting, but we are obviously looking at our own capability in this area. And I guess having a GB system will actually now allow us to prioritise substances that are most relevant to GB workplaces. So that's a benefit. And yeah, CAR remains in place, as I've said. So I guess the message is no change, but there is change going on in the background to sort of have a look at these things, particularly with respect to workplace exposure limits. I think this is my final slide, actually. So again, this is literally just, I'm not an expert at this. This is sort of something on the peripheral, but I have been asked to comment on this. I think the relevance really is to do with, it's basically a BSI Flex standard, which is all to do with basically improving the competence of individuals working across the built environment. So this came out of Judith Hackett's report following the Grenfell tragedy. So this was one of the recommendations out that to basically build competence within this industry. So, and BSI have been tasked to develop a framework of documents, and this is the first one, BSI Flex 8670 standard. So it's actually currently out for consultation. Like I said, HSE has been involved in consulting via the Asbestos network, so that's how I've become aware of it. But if anyone is interested in either this particular consultation or learning about BSI Flex standards, which is a new type of standard, that all can be found at that web address there. And like I said, I'll pop that in the chat box, but I think it'll also be on the email that will come out at the end of this. So I think that is everything. I hope I haven't gone over time, but yeah, thanks very much. Any questions, pop them in the chat box or ask me at the end. That's great. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. As Sam said, put the questions in the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of both the talks. Our next speaker is going to talk about ARCA site audits, evolution and current objectives. Jeff Silver is a chartered safety and health practitioner and is currently the compliance manager at the Asbestos Removal Contractors Association. Jeff has been at ARCA for nearly 16 years, and prior to that worked for the British Safety Council, and I think prior to that he was an asbestos analyst and surveyor. Much of his current working time is spent managing the audit provision, providing advice to ARCA members and assisting with licence renewal preparation for ARCA members. Jeff is part of the senior management team at ARCA, a role that helps to shape the business and the support that they provide for members and the public in general. He leads, directs and monitors the National ARCA Site Audit Accreditation Scheme for around 180 asbestos licence holders in the UK, and also manages the quality function of the organisation, ensuring that audits, training and assessment provision is compliant with current legislation and guidance and all the requirements of ISO 9001 2015. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Neil, for that introduction. It sounds quite complex, but hopefully it's not too much. Thank you, Sam, also for your presentation. Really enjoyed that. Just to start off with, I had a bit of license here to decide what the title would be. And I wanted to just point out the current objectives of our site audit scheme. It's not about just doing audits for the sake of it, but I wanted to point out the things we're trying to achieve. And the other thing was, I don't want it to come across as we do these site audits and we're really, really great, because as I looked back at what we were doing a few years ago, which I thought was great then, I realized that it wasn't that good, and we've come a long way since. So I wanted to talk about the evolution, the process of continual improvement. And there may be some attendees today who are involved in some sort of scheme or program or something along those lines, and it is about looking at where you can improve and move things along. So I wanted to talk about the evolution of how we've got to where we are more than anything else. I'm not sure what people know about ARCA, so I thought I'd just start off and just give a little bit of background on it. It was formed in 1980, so our 40-year celebrations this year, very, very muted with the COVID-19 situation. But 1980 is pre-licensing sort of times, when some contractors were getting together and really just sharing good practice and trying to work out how to comply with emerging regulations and guidance on asbestos removal. So it was established as a trade association, to be honest, a bit of a boys' club probably back then, a good excuse to get together and chat about asbestos while playing a round of golf and so on. We still do the golf, but we've come a long way in the other areas too, I think. The way the organisation is structured, it's led day to day by our chief executive, who comes from the industry and has been in the asbestos industry, I think, all his working life. And the strategic direction is overseen by an elected governing council. And this governing body, it's elected from directors of member companies. So again, it's an organisation that's led by the industry rather than led by other people with just other business concerns. Currently, the membership of the asbestos removal companies is about 181. That's around 50% of all removal licence holders in the UK. We do have other membership categories as well. We also have the ATAC division, the Asbestos Consultancy and Testing, and 62 companies form that division as well. Our mission statement, I thought I'd pop that in. It's to give the best possible service and support to assist ARCA members and customers in providing safe, effective and ethical management of asbestos, thereby safeguarding the public. That's the driver really of what we're trying to do. We're a non-profit organisation. We're just trying to make things better and ultimately save lives. From a regulatory point of view, we could say that our objective is to partner with those who work with asbestos to reduce the spread of asbestos and the exposure to it to the lowest levels reasonably practicable. And that links directly with control of asbestos regs, particularly 16 and 11. When we look at all the different roles, whether it's HSE, whether it's ARCA, whether it's analysts and so on, we all have this common driver really, that it's about reducing the spread of asbestos and the exposure to it. The ARCA site audit side of it sort of developed about 20 years ago now and became a voluntary scheme. It's something that around about that time was publication of HSG 65 with sort of Plan, Do, Check, Act, the importance of reviewing performance, that sort of thing. And audit was becoming more and more popular as a means to measure performance. And so around the year 2000, it was mooted to do some site audits and just to measure performance. Bit of a tick box exercise back then, but at least it was a starting point. And several years later, it became a mandatory part of ARCA membership, certainly for the licensed asbestos removal contractors. We do have other membership categories where auditing is not a requirement of membership, but it certainly is for the removal contractors. We then developed some rules of membership to set the boundaries really as to what membership required and what people get for their memberships. And they're introduced to really enforce this requirement for site audits and set out the implications for non-compliance. We're currently on revision 20 of the rules of membership, which reflects, I believe, the progress we've made, and as things do progress in this industry, that we're able to incorporate them as part of our rules of membership. Just to give an example, for example, if one of those audits was to be considered unsatisfactory, so a failed audit in effect, the contractor would be required to prepare an action plan and submit that to us. Not that we really need to see the action plan, but we need to make sure that they've done something about it. Once that action plan is submitted, we then do a replacement audit to close out the audit findings from the original one. If that passes, then that's great, because we've picked up on things, they've been corrected, and the next audit has shown that it's been corrected. If the second audit fails, then there's something seriously wrong, and probably wrong at management level, rather than just a bad day on a particular site. The company is then suspended from membership pending full investigation of management systems and trying to troubleshoot why 2 audits in a row were failed. Originally, and for quite some time, it was 2 site audits per year, and last year we increased that to 3 per year, having consulted our members, and really 2 audits per year were not enough for most members to be able to show that they've got an audit strategy and that they've got can pick up trends and so on. So we've increased it to 3 per year, which strangely was embraced by all of our membership rather than considered a burden. So we were quite pleased that the way it was accepted. In terms of the development of the site audit accreditation scheme, this is the bit where I was preparing the presentation and I began to cringe a bit. As I said before, a few years ago, I thought that's a pretty good scheme, these site audits, and then we looked at what we actually did, and a great room for improvement. So if I just go through kind of how it was for quite a while. It used to be booked in advance by the licensed contractor for a specific date or time. For example, an audit had to be done, say, in the first quarter of the year. We'd send a letter out to remind them. They'd send in, can you audit this site on this date at this particular time? And we turn up and we do the audit. We did find out, and this troubled me at the time, that there was one particular company I found out, they'd be very careful in choosing the job. They'd even allow an extra couple of days on the job so that they could get everything right. They put their best site team on there. They even hired equipment rather than used their own, so that everything was as spotless as possible. Staged, basically, which wasn't very, very helpful. And we'll come to how we've addressed that on a future slide. The auditing was done by many associates dotted around the country, and we'd pick one that was not far away from where the work was going on, but that was difficult to really control quality, and I'll come to that as well. The audit form was very much a tick box. Is something there, yes or no? Not really helpful with differing circumstances. And one of the things in the asbestos industry is no two jobs are the same. So sometimes you have to have an approach where an answer may not strictly be yes or strictly no, and it might be something in between or justifiable, and that was never really covered either. The accreditation scheme was assessed, the audits were assessed by a specially formed committee, and they would deem whether the audit was satisfactory or not. Just prior to me joining ARCA, so I'm told by some existing committee members, they said they'd basically sit around the table, read through the report and decide whether it was good enough or not. And that was about where it was. And obviously we've come a fair way since then. It was a very lengthy process. The auditor would carry out the audit and write up the report by hand, put it in the post, often second class to save a few pennies, and by the time we got it, we put everything together. People met around the table, talked it through. We'd write a letter back to the company to give their audit result, and it could take 6 to 8 weeks, which is quite horrifying these days, but back then it was considered normal. So it's all done on paper, communicated by post. As I say, we thought that was a pretty good audit scheme at the time, but we have moved on quite a bit since then. Just on the lengthy process, some companies do a lot of one-day jobs, so 6 to 8 weeks. Can be quite easily 20 or 30 jobs later, and then they get feedback on a previous job, which is not very helpful at all. So in terms of development, we had to look very carefully about what we were doing. And something fairly unique in the asbestos industry is that it's a diminishing industry in this country. The more that's removed, the less there is left, obviously. And so we have to have this approach that's less about finding customers for our products and more about developing products for our customers. And so that's the way we approach, trying to give benefits of membership. So when we develop our product, this being the site audit, a lot of review processes and really grasping opportunities when they arise and creating opportunities wherever we can to make those improvements. And at the end of it, we're trying to focus on ways to make it more beneficial to the company that is being audited. If it's of no benefit to the company, then why do it? And why would they want to do it? And as a membership organisation, we believe that members should get more from their membership than it actually costs them. Otherwise, why do it? Which I think is a fair reason to focus on the benefits to the members. So if we go back to how it was just some years ago, it doesn't really benefit the members much at all, in that the audit's booked in advance. It's not really a true state of typical work. It's pretty much staged for the audit, so they get a good result. As I said, with a lot of associates dotted around the country doing the audits, firstly, they're only doing them periodically, so they don't get used to it so much. There's not that consistency. Quality control was really difficult. Tick box approach doesn't help because it doesn't give much guidance. Deeming it just satisfactory or not doesn't help. The lengthy process doesn't help. So we looked at all these things and thought, how can we improve them? So we developed a standardized marking scheme. not an easy thing to do, and it still gets some adjustments here and there. But we based it on a numerical scoring system with some weighting that's in there according to the seriousness. So if a non-conformance is of a serious issue, then obviously it has a higher score than if it's a less serious issue. We also found that there were some companies that were just scraping through each time and not really improving. And so we introduced a little band called a borderline pass, just to say, look, it's okay, but only just. And your last one was okay, but only just. And we had a borderline pass to try and get people to really push improvement rather than just sit where they were. Following on from that, we introduced grades, A to E being satisfactory and F being unsatisfactory. Still causes a few frictions. Some people don't like being told that their audit was a D or an E, even though it's scraped through. But we're sticking with that for the time being, because it does give an indicator of how compliant a company is. And what we've tried to do as well is avoid percentage scores. With so many sort of prescriptive requirements for asbestos removal contractors, yeah, the audit is quite lengthy, a lot of criteria, and it's possible to get, say, 98%, which sounds fantastic, but that 2% of non-compliance could be an enforcement notice from the HSE. And so it gives a very misleading it's a misleading approach to say you've scored a percentage compliance of this or that. So we've tried to avoid that and just stick to the grades. On the weighting system, there are some things that are considered so serious that it's an automatic fail, even if that's the only thing that's wrong. So, it could be that the decontamination unit is not set up and ready for use, but work is going on. That's absolutely serious, and that would automatically fail the site audit. If there's no plan of work on site to be followed, that's the instruction to the site teams. If that isn't there for some reason, it was in the guy's van and he's nipped out to the sandwich shop, or it's in for a service or something, that's an automatic fail. So we are quite strict on quite a few of the criteria that we set. We've also invested quite a bit in recent years on a development of a bespoke audit app. So audit findings and comments are made, and that's recorded electronically. We can put photographs in, which are date and time stamped as evidence of how something actually was at a particular time. The app actually compiles an audit report, and at the completion of the audit, signal permitting, we can send a copy of that completed audit report through to the company representative. So quite typically within 5 minutes of completing the audit report lands in the email box of a particular company representative who can act on the findings. And the report also includes an action plan as a template that can be filled out where further action is required. So that's something that we've put in that we feel has made a big improvement in terms of turnaround and benefit to the company to help them to do something with their audit findings. Something else that it was my dream for many, many years, and we could never quite work out how to do it, and that's to have site audits that are unannounced rather than booked in 2 weeks in advance for a specific date and time. And after all, HSE can turn up unannounced, and we felt a little bit, I wouldn't say disadvantaged, but we wanted to also be turning up unannounced because we felt the benefit was there for companies to always expect an HSE visit or an ARCA audit or anything similar. We have a contractual agreement now with the HSE where we get a weekly summary spreadsheet of notified and licensable work. And the company knows to expect 3 unannounced audits in their membership year, and literally we just turn up on site and say, we're here to do your audit. Surprisingly, again, that's been welcomed by most of our members. They might have a little whinge or moan, but most of them have been very, very happy to have an audit done, and in many cases very proud to have got a good grade as well with an unannounced audit. A lot of cooperation from clients as well, who it's in their best interests to have an unannounced audit and to know the true state of what's going on. And some clients have even contacted us to say, if you ever need access to our sites, here's a number to call, or here's a contact, and we can get, you know, arrangement at the gate or something to let you in, and so forth. So it's been really, really encouraging, and it helps us to gauge the true state of the industry, which is something I think is of greater benefit long term. We also try to improve the feedback that goes back to the licensed contractors. What we've done as well, we've put in categorization of non-compliances as minor, major, or critical. We did have some inquiries at one point, and one contractor in particular said, we can't understand why we've got 2 non-compliances and we've got a C grade, and last time we had 3 non-compliances and got a B grade. And we had to explain that, well, some things are a bit more serious than others. So we introduced minor, major, and critical to give a guide as to where the priorities need to lie. Also, through the Audit app, we're able to do automatic scoring now and grading. So when the email report is, or the report is emailed straight after the completion of the audit, it also gives the scoring, the grading, an interim grade, which then is subject to a verification process just to double check that everything's working okay. We also looked at the quality control and standardization, and we took the decision to employ some full-time auditors. We have 2 full-time auditors and soon to appoint a 3rd. And we use our ARCA trainers as well to do audits, so that they can bring their training skills to site. If you know, the equivalent of little toolbox talk, really, if something needs to be addressed. And also they can take their site experiences back into the training room so that we can help make improvements across the board. We do unannounced QC audits on each of our auditors every month. And basically, they don't know when we're turning up either. So this unannounced theme continues through. And either myself or the chief executive will turn up at a site immediately after the auditor has left. Quite literally, we can follow the tracker on the vehicle and know they've just driven away, and turn up and do another audit. That's our way of checking the quality of the audits that have been done. And so far, it's been very, very encouraging to see the levels of standardization that we've been able to have. We also have standardization meetings about every couple of months, so 5 or 6 times a year. And as I said earlier, we have a verification process before the final grade is awarded, so that, you know, we're just double checking the automatic scoring system. It's still overseen by a committee. Sometimes things are grey areas or unusual circumstances, and they give advice and guidance there. We have an appeals process in place, so that if the auditor has genuinely missed something, then the contractor has a right to have that corrected. And after all, the site audits do form a big part of license renewal as well, and it's important that it conveys the absolute true state of the job rather than something that might be seen as not accurate. And the whole audit scheme forms part of our own ISO 9001 certification as well. We also looked at the auditing sequence. It used to be sort of a chronological approach where we turn up on site, obviously be briefed on any risks that might be there, to assess any risks or what PPEs needed and so on, and we'd look at the plan of work, see how it was planned through, that it was notified properly, and then take a look at the practical side of it to see that the plan of work was being implemented. We did get a bit suspicious when we kind of get held up a little bit on the office or the site office side of it, and then we go and see the actual practical side, and whatever they were doing was put right. So what we do now is literally turn up and just look at the site itself, look at the work practices and the immediate site control. So the audit form was restructured so that we literally do look at work practices and site control for both asbestos risks and non-asbestos risks. And then we look at the plan of work and see if the planning was the same as how it was actually being carried out. Then we look at the measuring and monitoring side, so smoke test records, inspection records for DCU, enclosure, airlock, etc. And then we look at supporting documentation at the end, copy of license on site, medical training and face fit certs, that sort of thing on site as well. So we've restructured how we approach the actual site audit too, to again have a true state or true reflection of what's going on. And if it's great, then it's great confirmation. If it's not great, it can be corrected. We also did some changes to the actual call it question set, but they're no longer a list of questions, but they're actual standards that we expect contractors to adhere to. And we can obviously comment on compliance or non-compliance to the standard. One example here of a standard: the removal procedure observed, including the dust suppression method in use, is suitable for the ACM being removed. Kind of a bit yes, no, but more comment can be made there. This next one, another example: the waste route is free from any visible material appearing to be asbestos debris or from any bagged waste left unattended. I put this particular one in because the bit about any bagged waste left unattended wasn't in there in the previous version. And we had a phone call from an HSE inspector who turned up at a site in the afternoon and we'd audited in the morning. And this inspector found some bagged waste that was just left unattended on the waste route and wanted to know, firstly, whether our auditor saw that or not, and or recorded it or noted it or anything like that, or, to get an idea of how long the waste had been left there. And through discussion, we figured that that needed to be added to the audit question. So we're open to comment. HSE viewpoints as well can be added in there to try and improve the whole product. But there's currently about 140 different standards that need to be adhered to. Anything from the site diagram should, for example, show a transit route if it's not a directly connected decontamination unit, right through to things like removal method, bagging of waste, and so on. Something that we also introduced just to try and push people along, give an incentive, we introduced a Gold Site Audit Award about 9 years ago. And the criteria for that was all audits had to achieve grades A to C with an average of at least a B grade. So even if somebody got a C grade, put things right, and got an A grade, next time it averages the B grade, that basically. And that would have to be achieved also for 6 consecutive site audits. 2 audits per year, 6 was a 3-year period, so a maximum license period of 3 years. Because we introduced unannounced audits, we have to do a weighted adjustment. Sometimes we turn up, maybe it's a 2-week job and we turn up in the middle of it, and it's a 2-phase job and they've just finished phase 1 and about to start phase 2. So there's less to audit, so we have to have a weighted adjustment just to take that into consideration. If there's less to audit, it should be easier to get a higher grade. And also that the company had not been subjected to any prohibition notice or prosecution relating to asbestos in that time period. Just a summary of the sort of audit types. We've expanded the audits available as well. So we've got the unannounced membership audits that we've spoken about. But as part of the application for membership, it's always been a requirement to pass a site audit, but they are also now unannounced. So their first experience is right there at the standard that we expect. As I said before too, if an audit is deemed as not satisfactory, so an F grade, a replacement audit will need to be arranged, and we arrange that on an unannounced basis, so the contractor doesn't know when we're going to turn up at a site to do that replacement audit. We also do additional audits. Some companies might only do 4 or 5 jobs a year, and if we audit 3 of those, that's a high percentage. But other companies might have 700 or 800 notified jobs in a year, and so 3 is a very, very small percentage. And they can bolt on additional audits. They can either be unannounced. So one company says, can you do 3 extras per month? Just turn up. And some would like an additional audit for a particular reason, perhaps a certain site team, perhaps a particular job, particular type of work, or a particular client, and they might just want an audit done on a very, very specific job or phase of a job, and that can be done by arrangement as well. So in those cases, the contractor knows when we're turning up. And we also have expanded the audit app so that ARCA members can do their own internal audits on an adapted form. Same audit criteria, but it makes it quite clear that it's an internal audit, not external. And by auditing the same criteria, firstly, any updates we update across the board. Secondly, they can do a lot of trend analysis, comparing internal and external audits. So that's the sort of suite of audits that we currently do. When it comes to license renewal, the application form for renewing the license has got a few questions in there regarding measuring performance. Questions like how you measure the performance of your business when working with asbestos, how you review your performance, develop action plans, your audit strategy, and how often, whether they're internal, external audits, how often are they carried out? Also, how do you ensure that they're as effective as possible? Are they announced or unannounced? Are they asking the right questions? How do you audit your own work internally? What you do with those results and other forms of feedback. And as part of the submission for license renewal, give 3 examples of how your company's fully addressed non-compliances or concerns that have been raised by external auditors and to prevent them from recurring. So quite detailed questions about audit in the license renewal process these days. And so we try and assist our members to have all the information that they need to be able to do that. And just current developments, things that we're working on at the moment. We want to provide a means for our members to be able to better analyse their audit results. What we're doing now is each of those audit standards, those 140 or so, are going to be either a planning issue, a doing issue, so site implementation, or it's going to be a check process, the inspection records and so on. So we're going to categorize the standards into those 3 categories, and basically an audit result can be drilled down to find out where the issues are. Was it the planning that let the job down, or was it the actual application of the plan that let the job down, and so on. And they'll be able to analyze their own audit types, so internal against external, announced, unannounced, etc., and be able to benchmark against the ARCA average. So that's something that we're working on at the moment, so that members can better demonstrate the ACT side of the plan do, check ACT cycle. So that's sort of current things that we're developing right now. Just to review our mission statement, what we want to do is give the best possible service and support to ARCA members and customers, and making sure that our underlying sort of goal really is to reduce the spread of asbestos and exposure to it while we're working with it. So thank you very much. I hope it's been beneficial, just a bit of an insight in what we do and the process that we follow to get to where we are. And I dare say that in a few years' time, we'll look back at where we are right now and probably think, well, that was a bit primitive. We've come a long way since. So I hope that is the case, and we can continue improving. So thank you. Just going to hand back now. Any questions on this and Sam's presentation, the opportunity is here to do that. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Jeff and Sam. As Jeff said, please type your questions in. Normally we sort of make a sign of appreciation to our speakers. Now obviously we can't do that today, so we'll have a sort of a virtual clap, I suppose. And I think I now hand over to Helen, and she'll run the question and answer section, I believe.
Sorry, Neil, I think it's Lee that was doing them.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I've got them. Luckily, we've got a couple in already, so I'll start running through them, and then if you've got any, I believe you've got about 15 minutes left to go through a few questions. So the first one we've got is there a cost for the HSE small business app?
Yes, sorry, I didn't do my sales pitch very well at all, did I? It's £2.99.
Nice and easy one there. And then the next question, following the exit from EU, do you feel legislation, etc., will be issued quicker?
The honest answer is I've got no idea. I don't work directly in the policy section. I think, as I said earlier, or alluded to, I think the benefits are really going to be for GB to put a bit more emphasis on legislation that's fit for GB, as opposed to the whole speed of the process. But I guess all legislation has to go where every other legislation that's required. So where the bottlenecks are, I don't know. I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to answer that in full, I'm afraid.
No worries. And then Sam, if you just open your questions tab, there's two questions there for you that are a bit more on the wordier side. So if you are able to, there's a first one that begins with have you got that one?
Yes, yeah. So do you want me to read the question? So I think this is a question from Mick, and it's regarding it says, regarding Brexit, was there any discussion within HSE about taking notifiable non-licensed work out of the control of asbestos regulations and going back to just licensed and non-licensed? Excuse me, because notifiable non-licensed work was only ever a requirement of the EU directive. Okay, so that's a good question. I think the answer is, I don't know whether you're all aware, but the all regulations now have a regulation specifically called that permits or requires something called a post-implementation review of the entire regulations, and that is actually currently in CAR. I think the last one was in 2017. So the next one will be due for publication in 2022. So what I'm basically saying is that there is a process that will no doubt be commencing this year. I think there's been some delay because of Brexit and COVID, but will basically allow consultation with the public, bodies, organisations like BOHS to basically look at the regulations and are they fit for purpose, and any things such as that issue could be sort of addressed as part of that implementation review and acted upon. So I don't believe there's been, well, I haven't been involved in any active discussions, but there is provision of means for that to take place in the future, in the coming years.
Excellent, thank you for that. It's just easier for you to read something because the acronyms.
Yeah, the next one's quite.
But there's another one as well underneath. Are you able to go through that as well, please?
Yep. Sure. Yeah. So this one here is So yes, it's a good question. So basically, Tim says, we have difficulty explaining to clients, contractors that running personal samples at 1 litre a minute is outside our uncertainty budget. So basically, the current HSG 248 has this 1 litre per minute in that table 5.2 that I showed you earlier. So is HSG 248 very imminent, or is there an interim document statement from HSE that we can point to? So, so what I would say is if you go back to we always have to go back to what the regulations say, and if you go to the guidance document L143, which is the Control of Asbestos Regulations, ACOP and Guidance. If you go to Regulation 2, that basically covers all the definitions and control limit. You'll see there that under control limit, it actually says, I don't know it off by heart, sorry, should do. But it basically refers not to HSG 248, but to the World Health Organization method, which HSG 248 is based on. So, and that, the World Health Organization method actually stipulates a flow rate range for compliance testing against control limits of between, I think it's 0.5 to 2. So it's already there, but in the World Health Organization method. That's basically, it's already written in law, but I appreciate it's not in the HSG 248, and HSG 248 has probably been updated to reflect that position. So what I've done, I'll press now. If you want to have a look at the World Health Organization document I referred to, it's in there. I think it's section 3.1.6. I'll just send that to everyone now. That will be able to, hopefully I've explained it, and also look in Regulation 2 in, excuse me, L143. Does that help? Hopefully, Tim. Okay, that's great.
Cool. And then Jeff, we've got one for you. So do ARCA audits cover non-licensed work / NNLW? Also, does it look at whether short duration maintenance activities to see if a valid exemption applies?
Okay, yes, several questions rolled into one there. Firstly, the ARCA audits don't cover non-licensed work or NNLW. The spreadsheet we get from HSE is just for licensed work. So basically, we don't know when or where contractors are doing non-licensed work. We do, however, with the app that we've developed for our members to be able to use, we've got 3 audits available in there. One actually mirrors the ARCA audit entirely. And we also have an audit form that we've developed for them so they can do their own internal audits of non-licensed work. But as an organisation ourselves, we focus mostly on the licensed side of it, being the higher risk end in most cases. So hopefully that covers that first bit. And then it links into the next bit, the short duration maintenance activities. If a company wanted us to assess or to meet on site and to review that with them, we could, but again, it doesn't come as standard because we don't know when these activities are going on, so we can't just turn up unannounced to look at short duration maintenance activities. But a good point, if a company wants some guidance on that and want a site visit, we'll arrange to come out and work with our members. And that's part of what we try and do. We try and work with our members rather than just invoice them once a year for a membership fee and that's it. So yeah, the answer to that is we don't, but we would if we were asked to. So hopefully that helps, Mark.
Excellent, thank you. That's the last of the questions we've got for now, but we'll just give people a moment if they just type in one, and if not, we can wrap up. Another one for you, Jeff, there. You mentioned an internal audit for NLW. Is this available on the ARCA website?
No. Basically, the internal audit app, because we have to do it with a license, and we've got obviously sort of maintenance costs to keep the app going. So there is a small fee that the members can subscribe to, and that gives them access to the audit forms. It's not part of membership. It's like a bolt-on. I think it's only like £150 a year per user, and it goes down with more and more users. So it's it's a fraction of the cost of an audit, to be honest, for a year's kind of license. But that's something that's just available to our members. It's not on the website itself.
And there's another question in here. I'm not sure which one of you this will go to. Is HSG 264 going to be updated to reflect new requirements to the new HSG 248?
So there's nothing in place to actively revise HSG 264 at the minute. But what I would say is, I believe that any sort of new requirements will sort of complement each other. Yeah, there's no active review in there in place. So that's probably not really helped, but yeah. But I'm not entirely sure whether there's any mechanism if there's anything that's fundamentally different, whether there's any sort of, sometimes it's possible to put addendums in or something like that, but I'm not aware. We'll raise that question actually with policy colleagues to see if there is anything that sort of falls into that need. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And then
did everyone, sorry Tim, did everyone see in the chat box, I've popped some of the links in, which you hopefully can just copy and paste into your,
yeah, we'll include all of these links in the email with the recording as well, just so nobody misses anything.
Cool, thank you.
Cool, so just give it another moment, and if nothing else comes through, like I say, we'll wrap up and I'll get the recording downloaded immediately. Cool, doesn't look like there's anything else coming through, so I might wrap it up there then, with a couple of minutes to spare, let you all get back to your busy days. So thank you to everyone again, to Helen and Alex for setting it up, to Sam and Jeff for speaking, for Neil for comparing for the morning. So I will, like I say, have questions and recordings and links out either this afternoon or tomorrow, and we'll let you know whenever we host our next regional webinar. So thank you all for your time, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Tim, there's just a quick question about HSG 247. That is due for an update. So that is in progress. So yeah, that's a quick answer to that question. Got that one in.
There's always one. Excellent. If you do have any other questions, you can email marketing@bohs.org, and that'll go to me, and then I can pass it on to the speakers. If you do have anything, yeah, send it across over the next few days and we can get an answer for you.
Okay.
Cool. So thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
yeah, like I say, speak to you all soon.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, Lee, as well, for organising.
No worries, anytime.
Thank you.